There are Hollywood romances, and then there's the quiet glow of Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell. No headline ever defined them. No ceremony ever contained them. For more than 4 decades, they've chosen each other the way most of us choose coffee in the morning, naturally, without a second thought, and with a feeling that the day will be better because of it. In a town that prizes the picture-perfect moment, theirs has always been the tender, everyday frame. Shoes by the door, a laugh across the kitchen, hands meeting in the dark of a theater right before the credits roll. What makes this love story remarkable isn't the spectacle, it's the steadiness. And that's exactly where our story begins. Before their names were ever spoken together, each had a life strong enough to stand alone. Goldie Hawn trained as a dancer and carried that musicality into everything, comedy, drama, even the way she walked onto a set as if a melody could break out at any second. On television, she became the bright spark audiences tuned in for, a kind of American sunshine whose timing felt like jazz, surprising, delightful, precise. When the film roles came, they came with honors, and early. Success didn't knock politely, it marched in with fanfare. The point isn't just the trophy on a shelf. It's that Goldie built an identity rooted in craft and curiosity long before love entered the frame. That mattered, because a partnership is strongest when each person is already whole. Kurt Russell's path was different, but just as grounded. He grew up on sets, the kind of young professional who learned to take direction before most of us learned to parallel park. There was a quiet seriousness beneath the easy smile, a sense that he studied people for a living, collecting small truths and turning them into characters. By the time he was a young man, he had logged thousands of hours in front of cameras that see everything and forgive nothing. He learned range, he learned restraint, and he learned the most important thing of all, to show up, prepared, every single day. If Goldie arrived as a beam of light, Kurt arrived as a steady flame. Their paths first crossed the way many Hollywood stories do, on a studio lot that smelled faintly of sawdust and fresh paint. She was in her early 20s, he was still a teenager. The timing wasn't right for romance, and the encounter passed like two travelers noticing each other across a station platform as trains rumble by. But recognition leaves a trace. They remembered. And years later, when life had turned a few pages, the trace would become a line, and the line would become a circle they would step into together. They reconnected as adults on a film set with its own humming energy, early call times, late-night rewrites, the intricate dance of cameras and lights and people trying to make something true. What drew them close wasn't a thunderclap. It was a conversation that kept refusing to end. They found they could talk about work without getting lost in ambition, about family without apology, about values as if the word weren't old-fashioned but necessary. There's a particular chemistry that appears when two accomplished people discover they want the same simple things: kindness, humor, and a home that feels like sanctuary. That spark doesn't flare so much as it warms, and warmth tends to spread. The first date that followed has become part of their personal lore, not because it was glamorous, but because it was charmingly imperfect. There was a movie premiere, some dancing in a place with a bit of old Hollywood polish, and an impulsive stop by a house under renovation that didn't exactly welcome guests. Keys were misplaced, a door that should have been closed was open, and soon there was a brief, comical misunderstanding with people who were just doing their job. It was the kind of mishap that could have ruined a night. Instead, it became a story they told on anniversaries, a reminder that spontaneity can be a compass, that laughter can be a bridge, and that the best memories arrive slightly scuffed. From the beginning, their romance was less about perfection and more about delight. Valentine's Day would become their private landmark, tucked away from the cameras but deeply meaningful. In a world that measures love by dramatic gestures, theirs would be measured by a steady tradition, a day to remember the beginnings, to recommit, to laugh about the little things that went wrong and the big things that went right. That rhythm, personal, consistent, unspectacular in the best way, was a hint of the life they would build. What truly defined their union, though, was family. Goldie was already the devoted mother of two, and the bar for anyone entering that circle was set at the highest level: patience, presence, and genuine attention. Kurt met that standard the way he approaches any role, by showing up, by listening deeply, by treating children not as accessories to an adult life but as the center of the story. Later, as their blended home grew to include his son and then their son together, the picture only widened. If love expands to fill the space it's given, then theirs was a house with open doors, extra chairs around the table, and a calendar dotted with school plays, early morning practices, and late-night talks where trust takes root. What followed would shape not just a couple, but a clan. Behind the scenes, they set boundaries that made sense, privacy when it mattered, warmth when it counted, and a shared commitment to normalcy even when their careers demanded the opposite. Fame is loud, home is quiet. They chose the quiet. It showed up in the ways that don't sell magazines but build character, sitting through a 2-hour recital and remembering to compliment the effort afterward, leaving a set early enough to make dinner, learning the names of teachers and friends, being the last car to leave the parking lot after a game because that's when the best conversations happen. Over time, those small choices become a family language, and once you speak that language, you speak it for life. Their fans saw a version of that harmony on screen. When the romantic comedy that many of us rewatch on rainy afternoons arrived, audiences didn't just enjoy the jokes and the plot, they felt a deeper ease seeping through the dialogue. Chemistry isn't a trick of lighting, it's a trust exercise. The banter, the blink and you miss it glances, the feeling that two people are listening even when they're talking, these are the tells of a partnership practiced off-camera. The movie worked because the partnership worked, but the partnership worked because the life beneath it was real. Outside the frame, they steered their careers with intention. He took roles that stretched him and roles that simply sounded fun, moving between crowd pleasers and quiet character pieces. Without fuss, she calibrated her work to the season she was in, sometimes leaning in, sometimes stepping back, always aware that a job ends when the credits roll and a family doesn't. If there was a master plan, it was merely to protect the center. When an opportunity supported the life they were cultivating, they took it. When it threatened to crowd out what mattered most, they said no. That kind of clarity is a luxury, it's also a discipline. And then came the question the world kept asking, why not get married? Their answer, given without apology and without judgment for anyone who chooses differently, was disarmingly simple. They believed in commitment as a daily choice, not a one-time vow. They valued independence not as distance, but as respect. Having both walked the path of divorce before, they understood that paper alone doesn't secure a future, only practice does. Their stance wasn't a rejection of tradition so much as an affirmation of intention. Love, to them, is proven not by ceremony but by how you behave on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing spectacular is happening. For many, that perspective was quietly radical. For them, it was simply true. What made their perspective resonate wasn't a manifesto, it was their manner. They explained their choice without defensiveness, modeled it without fanfare, and lived it without contradiction. The world watched, waited for a crack, and mostly found only consistency, two people choosing each other across decades. If romance is a spark, partnership is a skill. It's the skill of listening even when you disagree, of protecting each other's dreams even when they take you to different sets in different cities, of forgiving the human moments and celebrating the good ones right away instead of banking them for a rainy day. That steady work, done in private, is what kept the public story so enduring. Their home life produced another kind of legacy, children and, later, grandchildren who speak about them not as icons but as constants. There is a particular tenderness in the way grown children describe a parental figure who chose them, who arrived not by obligation but by decision, and then stayed. In those tributes you hear the values that guided the household, generosity, humor, responsibility, and a gentle insistence that gratitude changes a room. A family doesn't have to be tidy to be strong, it has to be committed. Theirs is a tangle of schedules and personalities like any other, and yet the through line is unmistakable. They are, quite simply, a unit. As the years went by, their sense of service widened. Goldie's interest in the inner lives of children, how they think, how they manage emotions, how they build resilience, grew into a foundation dedicated to teaching skills that many of us had to discover the hard way. Long before the phrase social-emotional learning became common, she was sitting with scientists and educators, turning research into tools any classroom could use. The idea is elegant. If children can understand their minds, they can navigate the world with more steadiness. It is the same respect she incurred extended at home, scaled to help countless families they would never meet. That is what legacy looks like when it leaves a studio lot and enters a life. Philanthropy, for them, never felt like a public relations strategy. It felt like an extension of values. You could see it in the way they showed up, sometimes in a ballroom, sometimes in a gymnasium that smelled faintly of crayons, ready to listen, to encourage, to shoulder a bit of the work. It's easy to be generous once, on a glamorous night when cameras are near. It's harder, and more meaningful, to be consistent for years. Consistency is, after all, the story they've been telling together since the beginning. Honors arrived, as they often do when someone has persisted with grace. The day both of their names were laid into history on a famous sidewalk, side by side, felt less like a coronation and more like a family reunion. There were speeches from colleagues who know what it takes to endure in this business, photos of laughter that looked like relief, and a small, memorable image. 2 stars near enough that anyone walking by could see how separate careers can still share a single, unbroken line between them. In a business that loves a comeback, they offered something rarer, continuity. And just when you think you know the end of the story, a new chapter arrives wrapped in twinkling lights. Late in their careers, they found themselves playing a pair beloved across living rooms worldwide, bringing a wink, a warmth, and a feeling of old-fashioned cheer to family movie nights. It was escapism, yes, but also an affirmation of what audiences longed for, a sense that kindness still wins, that laughter still heals, and that love can be playful well into its later years. Watching them in those roles felt like getting a postcard from a couple who has figured out how to keep wonder alive. Of course, decades together don't happen without challenges. Life is life, full of schedules that collide, illnesses that scare, distances that stretch patience, mistakes that test forgiveness. What distinguished them was the refusal to turn private struggles into public theater. They handled what they had to handle with discretion, and when they spoke about difficulties, they did so with compassion instead of complaint. If resilience has a sound, it is not a roar, it is the quiet closing of a door as 2 people enter a room to talk, to listen, and to try again. In a culture fascinated by collapse, they chose to make endurance their headline. Culturally, their partnership became a touchstone for a different way of thinking about commitment. They didn't campaign for it, they simply lived it. But as the years accumulated, their example took on shape. You can love deeply and keep your independence. You can be devoted parents and still nurture your own ambitions. You can reject a convention without rejecting the people who cherish it. Most of all, you can decide that the most romantic sentence in the language isn't "I do, but I still do," said in 100 small ways no one will ever tweet about. That's not rebellion, that's maturity. Their story also offers a master class in pacing, both in careers and in love. They never sprinted to the altar because the world asked them to. They never sprinted to retirement because the calendar suggested it. Instead, they moved at the speed of honesty, fast when a project lit them up, slow when a grandchild needed a bedtime story, public when a premiere called, private when the family calendar did. That kind of pacing takes courage in a place like Hollywood, where urgency is a currency. It's a reminder to the rest of us that a beautiful life is often a well-edited one. Listen closely to the way friends describe them and you'll hear the same notes repeated: humor, generosity, steadiness. Humor is the oil that keeps the gears turning. Generosity is the habit that keeps a family soft around the edges. Steadiness is the promise that tomorrow, you'll be who you were today, only a little kinder. When you watch them together, you notice the glances more than the words, the practiced way people who have weathered storms take each other's measure in a crowded room and decide, wordlessly, to leave a little early, to stay a little longer, to hold hands for a beat before stepping onto a carpet lined with flashbulbs. Those are the rituals that no ceremony grants and no camera truly captures. It is worth returning, for a moment, to where we began, the choice not to marry. In some ways, that decision has become the headline, overshadowing the sentence that follows it, and they stayed together. The staying is the miracle. The not marrying is simply the context. There are many roads into lifelong partnership. They picked one that suited their history and their hope, and then they walked it with respect. The wisdom underneath is portable. Build trust daily, not only on anniversaries. Protect your partner's dignity in public and in private. Praise in the open, correct in the quiet. Leave room for growth and you'll be surprised how many seasons a love can hold. Meanwhile, the family keeps expanding. New voices around the table. New photographs on the mantle. The next generation stepping into careers of their own, carrying pieces of the story forward. Resilience here, playfulness there, a certain twinkle that reads like genetic memory. Ask those children and grandchildren what impressed them most, and you won't hear about premieres. You'll hear about a grandparent in the front row of a school auditorium, about a phone call that came right when the day went sideways, about a kitchen where everyone feels welcome even when the timing isn't perfect. That's the architecture of a legacy. And still, the work continues. The foundation that bears Goldie's heart for children moves on, classroom by classroom, giving young minds permission to slow down and notice the thoughts that try to carry them away. It is the sort of project that changes lives one quietly triumphant day at a time. A child sits a little taller after learning a breathing exercise. A teacher feels less alone because they have tools that help. A parent sees a child regulate big feelings and realizes home has shifted toward peace. At its core, that mission mirrors the partnership that inspired it. Choose calm, choose compassion, choose again tomorrow. From time to time, they'll step out and remind the world that joy isn't a resource we have to ration. A comedic cameo, a warm interview, a holiday movie that feels like a cozy sweater. And then they withdraw to the life they've built, where the best applause is the laughter of people who know the full story. The balance is almost musical, a verse of public work, a chorus of private living, repeated and rearranged across the years. So why does their romance still capture our imagination? Perhaps because it whispers something most of us long to hear, that a love can be both free and faithful, that independence and intimacy are not opposites, that the rituals of home can outshine the rituals of celebrity. They have shown that a partnership can be a place where you are known and still delighted in, corrected and still cherished, and still respected. In an age that prizes novelty, they offer a counterspell, depth. And perhaps, too, we hold on to their story because it teaches the art of the long view. When the spotlight turns elsewhere, keep tending to what matters. When the season gets noisy, lower your voice. When you make a promise, keep it in the small ways, and the big ways will take care of themselves. When the world asks you to perform your love, remember that the best performances happen at home, with no audience, when you think no one is watching, and your partner always is. If you were to reduce their decades together to a single phrase, it might be this: chosen daily. Chosen across moves and movies, across disappointments and delights, across the 1,000 tiny chance moments that make up a long life. Chosen in the quiet after an argument, chosen in the grin that shows up at a punchline you've told 100 times, chosen in the persistent belief that the person beside you is your favorite person, even on ordinary Tuesdays when nothing seems particularly cinematic. And that is why the absence of a wedding ring reads, not as a missing piece, but as a stylistic choice in a larger composition. Every partnership writes its own sheet music. Theirs leans into harmony more than crescendo, into rhythm more than solo. It has room for improvisation and a spine of melody you can hum from memory. It begins with an unlikely first crossing, crescendos through a second chance, settles into a theme of family and service, and then, because this is a long-form ballad, returns to the refrain, choose each other, choose each other, choose each other. As the credits of this story fade, we're left not with a final declaration, but with a scene. It's evening. A lamp is on. 2 mugs on the counter steam gently. Someone mentions an article one of the grandkids wrote, or a scene in a show that surprised them, or a plan for a weekend that involves nothing more ambitious than a walk and a good sandwich. This is what enduring romance looks like after the fireworks. The soft glow of a home that's been loved into beauty, the comfort of a hand you know by heart, the promise of tomorrow whispered without words. And so, after all the years, after all the roles, after all the speculation about why a ceremony never happened, the answer has been sitting in plain view. They didn't need a wedding to write a marriage. They wrote it anyway, in breakfasts and bedtime stories, in compromises and inside jokes, in patience, in laughter, in work that honors people, and in a family that keeps widening its circle. If love is a verb, this is what it looks like conjugated in the present tense across 4 decades. I choose, you choose, we choose.